There it is.
We're playing tonight?
Welcome, everyone, to North Ogden City Council. Appreciate your attendance and visit this evening.
Remind everyone to sign in if they didn't.
If everyone hasn't signed in, please do so we know who's present. Also, mute your cell phone so we don't have any disruption during the meeting. We'll begin the meeting with a pledge of allegiance and invocation by Council Member Stoker.
Father in heaven, as we gather this evening to this council meeting to discuss things, we pray that we will be able to do so in a manner that is be able to respectful and civilly and listen to those opinions and things that are said. We're grateful for this country we live in, and we're especially grateful for the men and women who are serving and who sacrifice and have sacrificed so that we have these freedoms and these rights. We ask you that thou would be mindful of them and their families and watch over them. We're grateful for this community and the residents within, and grateful for all that we have, and say this in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen.
Please rise and say the I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We have a special presentation this evening by Tammy Santier. She'll be presenting to Jenny Taylor.
My name is Tammy Santier. I am a United States Air Force and Persian Gulf War veteran. I was selected in January to carry the Utah flag in the Washington, D.C. Memorial Day Parade. I carried that flag to honor all of our followers, our fallen Utahns. But as a group, all of us flag carriers, we all picked one person to represent for a special memorial. And I picked Brent Taylor. I met him before my roles with CERT. I reside in Pleasant View and have been involved in joint different dealings between Pleasant View and North Ogden. And I carried that flag in his behalf. We had a 3-minute moment of prayer, specifically for the fallen. I'm sorry, I'm a little choked up about this. And for him as well. So I'm presenting the flag that I carried. This is the Utah flag that I carried in Washington, D.C. to Jenny. And I've also included some pictures with her here, showing her our moment of prayer and our flag group as we were marching down Constitution Avenue.
I could just say something. Thank you. This is the first time we've ever met. I feel like this is like sideways. What an honor this is and what this represents. Just today I was meeting with some Patriot Guard riders. You're all familiar with that wonderful organization, mostly of Vietnam era veterans. Came to my home to help me with a plumbing issue and got to talking about some special motorcycle rides they do to honor the fallen from Utah. Everyone from 9/11 until now, and they, in any manner of death, those that have died that have served and worn the uniform from 9/11 till now, and it numbers over 300. So I know that this flag, this picture obviously shows far more than one flag. It's not a Brent Taylor memorial, but Memorial Day for all of them, and I can't tell you what a humbling honor it is to have the opportunity to represent and maybe try to give a voice to those of us who are proud to support our service member. Last night I went to the rodeo and saw over 150, mostly airmen from Hill Air Force Base. They come from all over the country, all over the world, but they're stationed at Hill Air Force Base and carrying out a flag. I'm not sure any one of them holding that flag had ever met Brent Taylor, but they all love America. They've all taken an oath to sustain the Constitution of the United States against enemies, foreign and domestic, and I am more aware than anyone in this city, this state, or this country that this is not Brent Taylor's story. I can't reiterate that enough, how full my heart is to represent my husband, but more I represent my country at this time as we honor our pioneer heritage, we honor our American heritage. Whatever our biology is, whatever our genealogy is, that's not what I mean. I mean the heritage of this beautiful place in which we live. To see flags flying for people who've been in uniform or not been in uniform. People who've carried the flag down Cherry Days, who might have a family member in the military and might not have had anyone serve in the military for generations. But we all share a heritage outside of religion, outside of biology, to be members of this community. And I just can't thank everyone enough for the power of community. Much has been said recently, and I'm sure much will be said in months to come, of the power of community and the role of government. And I'm not here to talk politics because my husband was the one that did that, and I'll leave that to him and his legacy. But I'm here to celebrate community and the wonderful opportunities we have to come together to celebrate community, whether it's at a park or a neighborhood barbecue. Maybe it's when someone on our street comes down with cancer and has to fight that horrible battle, or when someone that we love unexpectedly is killed in an accident, or someone loses their job. The way this community rallies around each other is unsurpassed. It is beautiful. It is something in my mind that is sanctified. We have something so good here. And to see, I hate to call out Mark Daniels, but I will every chance I get. I don't know that he understands that, well, he probably does. That's why he works for next to nothing. But does he understand the role he plays in bringing art and theater to a community of youth in a day that is so distant and digital? And I want to thank you, sir. I know the youth have been working at the park this week. There's the band assembly tomorrow, gathering to share this young talent. I'm a mom of 7. That's my biggest worry above all. For them to be able to feel, for them to be able to connect, for them to be able to know they are part of something bigger than themselves, bigger than their cell phones, bigger than what YouTube tells them, that's a power. And that's something I've said before, and I'll say it many times again. We celebrate the greatest generation that fought and lived through World War II, and we should and we will, and we honor them. But we can't let that be an excuse to let this upcoming generation just float by. And the power of music, the power of the arts, the power of that neighborhood barbecue, the power of taking a casserole to the woman whose husband just died is power. I don't know another word for it other than power. And I thank you. I thank these people who serve willingly and at great sacrifice to their own time, those of you that are willing to run for office and step up to the plate, to put your hat in the ring, to perhaps hold an office, those who are employed by cities and municipalities and government, and those of you that wear the uniform of the United States in any branch of service. How humbling is that to know that for 243 years, men and women have bravely stood. At the beginning, they stood up against a monarch. They stood up against the greatest empire at the time on the planet. And now we can stand up against enemies, foreign and domestic, as we come together as communities. I love that. I love that about America. I love that about North Ogden. Perhaps as a child growing up here and attending Weber High, I was in a big hurry to get out of here, because when you're young and from a small town, all you want to do is get out of here. I can't think of anywhere else I ever want to be. I thank you for that. I thank you for that. I thank all of you for that. And above all, I thank God for that. And I would just challenge each of us to look within us and find a way to stand up, rise up, and raise up the next greatest generation, because that is our job. That is our job. That is what we need to do. And to have a community that can still connect, can still come together, can disagree on a lot of things and still be a community. That is beautiful. That is beautiful. Brent frequently said democracy is messy, because you can have your opinion and I can have mine, and they don't have to match. Isn't that beautiful? Brent died defending those freedoms. He died defending the freedom, the agency, the power to choose that another person used in order to kill him. And that is a beautiful thought as well. I'm grateful for that. I know I am only one of hundreds of thousands of Gold Star family members. And I bear that with great honor and an incredibly heavy weight. I thank you. I love you all. God bless America. May God bless this beautiful city of North Ogden. And no matter how we see politics, no matter how we see different specific issues, religion, biology, whatever it might be, may we all come together as a community, continue to rally around each other, because I promise you, I'm not the only one in this city with a broken heart right now. I'm not the only one in this room with a broken heart right now, facing hard things. And I thank you for letting me perhaps be a public face of that right now. And I thank you even more for knowing that I'm not the only one you're loving through hard times right now. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just mention that as I attended the funeral for Sergeant Robbins last week, the officiating priest at the Catholic Church had high acclaim for the citizens of North Ogden. He said, I've never seen a city that would rally around the people like they have around the Robbins family. So hats off to all of you. Thank you for your support. Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda, discussion or action to consider May 14th City Council meeting minutes. I would entertain a motion for that.
Mayor,
Yes.
I'd move that we approve the May 14th City Council meeting minutes.
It's been moved that we approve the May 14th City Council minutes.
Second.
Been seconded by Councilman Swanson. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Meeting now is open for public comments. Given the volume of people here this evening, please keep under the 5-minute rule for your public comments. We welcome your comments this evening. So, meeting is now open for that.
Hello, council members and mayor. My name is Stacy Gytris. I live at 873 East 1700 North in North Ogden. My husband Jonathan and I have been working on plans for about 8 months to build an addition onto our home. We planned from the beginning to have additional living space for our family of 9, but also to rent out bedrooms to Airbnb to help cover the cost for our building. We called the city first and tried to figure out the ordinances so we could see if our dream was in accordance with city requirements. We worked with John Call and Rob Scott. We met with them and went through plans. We found that in the RE20 zone where we live, it was legal to do nightly rentals, but we would have to build a detached building set far in our backyard. We went to work with Rob Scott and the city, and we were able to have the RE20 zone adopted in through that ordinance 111034 that was passed a few years ago for the RCC zone that would allow us to build onto the side of our house and instead of having it detached in the backyard. The change was made and we moved forward on the blueprints, and when we applied for our building permit, we were told we couldn't build an ADU and rent it out nightly because of some wording in the ordinance we had recently been adopted into, and it's found in 111034D5K. That wording says, not intended for sale. Accessory dwelling units shall not be sold separately from the primary dwelling unit, neither shall the primary dwelling unit or ADU shall be rented on a transient basis, which is periods less than 30 days. None of us had seen that in the ordinance throughout that process until we had turned in our application, and Brandon Bell pointed it out. In June, after working with Rob and John, Brandon sent us a letter that we could move forward with our building if we would draw a red line through the kitchen on our plans. So we did that, obtained our building license, and we're under construction. Our hope is to have the wording changed in that ordinance to allow us to move forward with building the kitchen and to be able to do nightly rentals separate from our living quarters. We ask you, the council, to consider removing this one sentence in 111034 that includes the wording prohibiting nightly rentals, quote, neither the primary dwelling unit or ADU shall be rented on a transient basis or period less than 30 days. We don't feel it will be a big impact, as very few people living in those zones are going to have the ability or desire to use a mother-in-law apartment in such a way. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you for your comments. Yes, please. I had that to Joyce.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Sean Casey, 2444 Barker Parkway. I'm looking for some clarification. We have discussion and possible action on 3, 4, and 5. I'm wondering if the action is possibly to approve those measures. If so, are we going to have time to comment on 3, 4, and 5 prior to the vote?
We hadn't planned on that. The public comments will be up front like they are right now, and then at the end.
So there's a zoning ordinance possible change. Am I reading the contract correctly?
You got that?
That, it would be a future request.
All right. The one question I do have is on the waiting pond, have we done the engineering? It might be discussed, and that's why I wondered if we would have time to hear and then comment after the discussion. But it would be nice to know if we're going to have, what frequency of changeover the water would be and what temperature. Yeah, it's a Phage. It's a cool shirt. I noticed, anyway. So, anyway, it would be nice to know the water temperature of the waiting pool. And there's some other questions I have, but maybe I'll listen to the discussion and we'll hear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comment.
Rod Barker, 2524 Barker Parkway. First of all, I want to say to all those who meet the candidates last week, I felt like everyone who was there represented themselves very well. Really, every one of you should be proud and feel good about what you had to say, and you represented yourself. And that said, I want to talk about that a little bit. That last week, I heard the word represent quite a few times. We want to represent. I want to represent. As a city, we represent. I looked it up in the dictionary. You know, for 8 years, I did a lot of writing as a curriculum writer, so words mean a lot. Represent by dictionary means to serve as a delegate or agent for. It also means to act as a spokesperson for. With that in mind, I listened as, I think it was unanimous, every candidate that was up on the stand talked about the gondola and about the Nordic Valley Project. I heard some say it's out of our hands. It's with the Forest Service and the County of Weber County. Our hands are tied, we really can't do much. And I just thought, you're kidding me. Our hands really can't be tied. As a representative of the city, may I just make a recommendation of something that the city can do? Mr. Mayor, City Council, maybe one of you could draft a letter, a document, stating the city of North Ogden, as an overwhelming majority, is opposed to that project. At least all 15 that were on the stand last week, all 15 said they were opposed to that project. I heard some say, we feel like the city as a whole is the vast majority opposed to this project. Can't a letter be written? And then, Mr. Mayor, you can sign it. All 5 city councilmen can sign it. I think you're all opposed to it. John, I don't know where you stand on it, but if you're opposed, you can sign it. I think if you took the letter to Alan Christensen, he would sign it. I don't know where Kyle Anderson sits, but I'm guessing he probably is opposed to it as well. There may be other prominent members of the city who you know of. They could sign it. And then we could be proactive and, as a representative of the community, take that document to the Forest Service and the Weber County Commissioner and say, here's where we stand. I don't really think our hands are tied. There are some things we can do. A second issue I want to just chat about for just a moment. Last week I heard a number of candidates use the word integrity. They're a person of integrity. I think I am too. It's a great word. Again, going to the dictionary, what does integrity mean? Adherence to moral and ethical principles, soundness of moral character, honesty, the state of being whole, entire, or undiminished. It also has a connotation of being consistent through time. That said, I noticed on the agenda tonight, we're talking about the Double Out Ranch detention pond again. It's been voted down once. It's been voted down twice, I believe. As you discuss it tonight, I would, as a citizen, would like to hear what's changed about the plan, so that as individuals of integrity, why would we vote different this time as opposed to last time? Have the concerns in the past been mitigated? Have they been changed? If they're the same, well then I think we continue to vote no. A third point, just very quickly. I live on Barker Parkway. I noticed today when I drove up the street, there are a number of new signs on our street, all along Deer Meadows and Barker Parkway, that say, I can't quote them, but essentially, no parking allowed for events, something along that line. I think if you were to ask the citizens of those two streets, all of them would say, thank you for the signs. They look a whole lot better than A-frames and caution tape all up and down the street. May I just point out one thing, though? in talking with my neighbors, I don't believe a single member of those streets were ever contacted about those signs being put up beforehand. All of them probably would have been in favor of the signs. I think they are now. But out of common courtesy, wouldn't it have been all right to just have a city employee go up and down the street and say, hey, we're going to put these signs up, instead of one day we show up and there's a sign sitting in front of homes? Anyway, that's all I had to say. Thank you for their service. I really do, as you know, consider all of you to be good friends and really greatly respect all of you. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Mark Daniels, 263 East Alberta Drive in North Ogden. The last couple of weeks, as you know, we've had a chance to be working with the youth of our community on a performing arts camp. We've had 53 kids from ages 4th grade to 9th grade working from 8:30 in the morning to 11:30 in the morning over at the amphitheater. We've used the lawn, we've used the apron of the stage, and we have had an amazing time. We've had 53 kids signed up, like I said, and we've had 8 incredible, talented staff working with us, including Melissa Shertuti, Caden Thomas, Caitlin Toole, and Brittany Bennett, and a whole lot of senior volunteers from the high school. We've taught them, well, tried to teach them music and even sheet music sight reading. We've taught them choreography and the different ways of storytelling. We have 2 days left, and on Friday night we have a performance, kind of a showcase for the kids who have been working hard to prepare different things from songs and choreography to storytelling. We're going to start at 8:30 p.m. Over at the amphitheater. It's free of charge, and it lasts about 40 minutes. We're starting at 8:30, so the sun will be down, and we can bring chairs out onto the concrete. And if we just like to send a personal invitation to you guys to come and see it, or anybody who wants to come and see it, to see these great kids, 53 kids performing songs from a whole lot of different shows, as well as storytelling and some skits, and you'll get a good laugh. It's a lot of fun. Thanks for letting us do that.
Thank you for that invitation. Thanks for your good work over there.
Neil Berube, 1532 East, 2525 North. First of all, I want to thank Jonathan for the time he spent with me yesterday. I want to address the issue on the pond. I just want folks that are here in the council to know the commitments we're making here. In Section 5 of that development agreement between North Ogden Corporation, Double Lot Ranch and Mountain Road LLC and 2100 North Investments, the city will authorize the developer to develop that property either under an MPC or 20 units per acre under R4, which is also an exception. Question that comes to my mind is how many high-density areas do we want in this city? John Hanson has a development. We know Marriott's looking for a development. I always ask the question, how often have you changed the oil in a rental car? No one yet has told me they've done that. And I believe in affordable housing, but I believe we need to concentrate on the culture in this city of the ownership and making sure we keep the city beautiful. Now, I understand we need smart and balanced growth, and I would agree that the use of that property as a detention basin over there now is not its fullest and best use. But I also understand it's going to take some work to get that done. So in this project, I think we need to decide how much risk the council is willing to take. There's no buyer for that property currently. Retail development is a bit soft now due to the uncertainty of online sales. We really don't know what the proceeds of the sale of that would be. We don't know what we'd have to do to grade the property to development status. We're making commitments to do certain things for the owner of the property in exchange for the 6.6 acres needed to construct the new park. That commitment is we will build the park and the city will pay for and construct the storm drain line, the sewer line, construct the 150 East roadway to base standards, install a 36-inch storm drain line on 2100 North, install a larger line later if necessary, waive building permits for 2 lots, forgo requiring a detention basin on the Northampton 7 and 8 subdivision, reduce landscape requirements at the development for Double Lot Ranch from 25% to 15%, and install a storm drain relief line sufficient capacity downstream from 2600 North to 1125 East. Now, I understand there's an urgency to do this because of the renewal of the storm drain license with DEQ will require a basin on that property. Now, I don't fault the developer at all. I want to make that clear. His job is to negotiate as good agreement as he can. I simply want the citizens of North Ogden to know what commitments they're making and the value of these commitments. It's my understanding that the most recent appraisal we have on that 6.6 acres is $1,150,000. I don't have any problem with waiving park fees and storm fees. I actually think that makes a lot of sense. However, the equivalent value of those is $1,321,000. Now, I'm not saying the property's not worth that much, but I think we had to have a current appraisal to support that value. I do recognize the city is having to come out of pocket with, not having to come out of pocket with the waiver of those fees, but yet that agreement goes out to 2043. I'm sure there'll be some increases in fees, and we're guaranteeing those fees will remain as they currently are. So by signing this agreement, the city commits to the developer, even if the project is not built. There's a provision in Schedule 2 of the agreement that states the city and the Double Lot Ranch acknowledge that the project of building the park and associated Pineview Basin may not be constructed, and if so, both parties agree that modifications may be made to the agreement. It does not outline any of those modifications. At minimum, the city is making a commitment of $2.4 million to do this as their portion of the building of this project, with the hopes this amount will be offset by the sale of the existing property. This amount does not include some of the other costs related to concessions made in the agreement. Seems the best case scenario of cost can only be realized if the entire project is completed and dealing with Pineview. We're relying on $4.5 million in grants from either the federal government or the state government. I believe we've already had $274,000 of the grant approved to do the environmental. I understand that that has to be completed, and that's one of the reasons the council has to make a decision before anything can go forward. So frankly, I don't think the developer needs the city to make his project work. In essence, I believe he's trying to accommodate the city. We surely can't fault him, but we can make sure that the city is being financially responsible. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comment. Seeing no other comments, we'll move on with the agenda.
Mayor, I would like to make a motion that we move number 6 up and before number 3, to move the pickleball discussion up.
There's been a motion to move number 6 up.
We still comment?
Pardon?
I'll second that, Mayor.
Okay, it's been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, number 6, we'll move discussion on the pickleball courts presented by Dr. Fossen.
Mayor and Council, thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate you including this on the agenda. We do have a number of pickleballers that are in attendance that would like to express their support. Would you raise your hand? All of you who, thank you very much. That's great. Well, this is on a little
sour to me.
This is on a little lighter note, but I can tell you that the demand for pickleball courts in this area is very high. Most of us during the summer go to Pleasant View, who have 4 courts, and most of the time there's a waiting area for us who want to play to get onto those 4 courts. Anywhere from, I'd say 8 to 12, 14 people are waiting to play. The 4 courts will hold 16 people, and I know from experience that this is crossing age limits. It's just not for us old folks to get out and run a little bit. The younger people are enjoying pickleball just as much as we do, and the demand is high. And I understand that you have put this on the plan for Parks and Recreation. I just wanted to pass this out to you.
That's all right. No worries.
Ryan's picked on today. Has Mike disappeared?
Originally, we were looking for property that would be a little bit more accommodating than Barker Park for pickleball courts. This diagram that you have here is the property adjacent to the Senior Citizen Center. Room there for 6 courts. It would be a perfect fit, but we understand that there's a commitment of the city to Weber County for the library for parking. I'm just wondering, and would like to propose that perhaps we do a study to see if that parking really is necessary or needful, and if there's anything that we can do in lieu of that for perhaps establishing some pickleball courts over there. On the other hand, we know that Barker Park has plenty of room. One of my big concerns about Barker Park is the wind. I live just on the other side of the park, and I can tell you at times when I go to Pleasant View to play, the wind will be blowing at my house, and the wind is not blowing at Pleasant View, and it really does make a huge difference. So with that in mind, we'd like to encourage the council to evaluate development of pickleball courts. As I talked with Tiffany, I understand that grants are available for about half the cost. She's telling me that the cost of pickleball courts is about $100,000 each, which seems a little high, but she probably knows better than I do. If perchance we put 6 courts in, half of it's paid by grants, that would leave about $300,000. And we have a number of people here and others that I've talked to who would be willing to do some legwork to acquire donations for development of pickleball courts as well. And I really think that we could at least do in the neighborhood of $100,000 on donations. So having said that, is there any questions about this item?
Go ahead, Ryan.
That was going to be one of my recommendations. I was on Pleasant View, well, I helped them on their staff when they put in their pickleball courts, and that whole process got started when neighbors raised money. Matt, I don't know if you were there or one of your office staff, but the neighbors raising money's actually got that whole project started.
So is that your recommendation,
Well,
council member?
I know I'd be willing to donate as well. I play pickleball. I've told staff here we need pickleball courts, but that's what got that whole project started. Is the neighbors went, and I could tell you who it was that started it all, and they did a big fundraiser, and I think they raised over $100,000, if not more. So
I know that some of the items over there are named for certain people that have donated to the courts, so that is a good idea. Well, we'll take that under advisement, and is there any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. Next item is major project discussion or action to consider the design and relocation of the 2550 detention basin. Our presenter will be John Call.
Okay, council. So as this is kind of the continuation of the discussion that started on May 28th when Pine View and Jones and Associates came to the city and said the separated design of the park doesn't work, and so we need to look at going back to what the engineers recommended was the fishing pond option that was first proposed back in 2016, 2017 timeframe. Not necessarily proposed to the council, but that's the option the staff first considered with this. Let me pull the slideshow up that I put together. So this is kind of a timeline of the project. The first time this project came on the radar was in EDC, when the consultant at the time that we had in the city for economic development, it was called Better Cities, recommended that the city explore options to move that basin to essentially turn that property in commercially viable property, create some sales tax, create some property tax, and hopefully utilize some less beneficial property for the detention of that water. Obviously, the biggest problem with that approach is water flows downhill, and so it has to be somewhere between that property and the edge of the city. As most of you know, the city kind of slopes towards Harrisville and then all the way out to the Great Salt Lake eventually. And so that's when Mayor Taylor and Matt Hardvigsen began looking at what properties might potentially work, and the one that was closest and most likely to work is this property that we've been discussing on the Double Lot Ranch, roughly 6.5 acres. As soon as, I don't remember, Ben might remember, but just so you know, sorry, let me pause for a sec. So we have Matt Hardvigsen with Jones and Associates, Ben Quick with Weber Box Elder Conservation District, and Dave Espinoza and Tiffany Staley and Lauren Gardner, who are city staffers here who can answer questions about this project. I think Ben might even have one of his engineers with him. Maybe not. He's got a gentleman sitting next to him that, and
Chairman of the board.
Yeah, but they. So I don't remember how Pineview found out about the project, but pretty early on they got involved in the discussion. The idea being they need a irrigation facility, and it might make sense to combine the two facilities into one to help share costs, especially on land, as well as there's some other costs that end up being a shared cost that save both groups some money. That project or that idea was tossed around for the next year or so, or the next 6 months, when the project was then formulated and presented in the budget meetings for the council at that time. I know all of you weren't on the council in 2017, but the project was approved in the budget to start the process. And the interesting thing in the timeline that I want to make clear is the grant that we keep talking about funding the project was actually identified after the project had been budgeted for, meaning that we were ready to build the project on our own dime, and it turned out that there was a grant available that helped reduce some of the cost. As it's been pointed out, it's still tax dollars. You know, it's tax dollars that go to the federal government that are now being spent in the community as opposed to just local tax dollars, but it still is tax dollars money, and we should be, or we should encourage frugality where we can. Based on that, at the beginning of 2018, the council purchased that easement from the Montessori school, and we authorized the construction of the pipeline, sometimes referred to as the pipe to nowhere. But it's the pipeline that was installed in anticipation of this project starting in the fall time frame of 2018. There were some questions that came up in 2018 that, sorry, it's gone backwards on me. Let me start the show again. Oh, they're individual. This is way fancier than I'm used to. And then the other grant that was identified is this Utah Outdoor Recreation Grant that we applied for and received. That one is tied to actual water recreation. But in talking with the state folks, we'd actually contacted them and told them to cancel this grant based on the decision the council made 4 or 5 months ago. And it turned out that they didn't cancel the grant and sent Tiffany some paperwork saying, hey, you need to tell us where you're at on this project. So Tiffany reached back out to him and said, oh, it's canceled, and explained the situation and what was going on. And they said, well, let the council make their decision before you decide if you're going to reject the money or not, because they sent the paperwork after the May 28th meeting. So we were kind of back in that flux situation. Our understanding is the fishing option would still qualify us for the outdoor recreation grant because it encourages people to go near the water. So it just keeps going backwards on me. Then as most of you know, I think everyone was on the council in May. That's when we declared that the old basin property as surplus. And then we entered into the contract to sell that basin to the J.D. Mercer Company for $1.65 million. And that, as you know, that sale ultimately fell through pretty early in the process. The developer found a project in Oregon they were more interested in and pulled the plug on our project. Since that time, we haven't actively tried to market it, but we have had 3 different development groups express interest in the property since then, most of them in the past 6 months or so. And most of them are developers who have actually done commercial projects in the city or are very familiar with the area. None of them have given us a price or a actual firm proposal on anything, because I've told them the council hasn't made the decision to move the pond yet, for sure. So we haven't asked them to go down that road. But in between that contract falling apart and now, the questions were raised about exactly what type of facility we want there, what approach the council wants to take. And so we held those open houses in June and July. And then in June of last year is when that $100,000 grant was officially awarded to us. And then, there we go. And then we've just kind of been discussing the design, discussing the options. And as you know, the council had made that official decision to separate the irrigation facility from the detention, or at least from a portion of the detention facility, in favor of a grass park with a separate pond. And the engineers in Pineview went forward with that proposal. And then in communications with the environmental engineer and just the design of the facility, it was discovered that by losing that third recreational component across all 6.5 acres, it put the cost-benefit ratio of the grant in question. And then also there was some detention capability lost. I think the number that we were quoted in that meeting was 10 acre-feet was lost. So we went from 22 acre-feet of storage down to 12 acre-feet of storage. And at the bare minimum, we have to replace 17 acre-feet of storage. So that's the real reason that this discussion is back before the council again. The idea being that we need to decide what or I guess not we, the council, the lucky 5 of you, need to look at what's being presented. I anticipate at some point Ben and Matt will both get up and add to what I'm talking about, as well as if the council has any questions. This PowerPoint was kind of intended to be a summary. It doesn't have every single bit of detail, and there'll be some points where I might go off the PowerPoint and talk about some other details associated with the project, trying to answer some concerns that have popped into my head or been raised by residents as I've talked with them over the past week or so. But the beginning, this was kind of the goals of the project, to increase the property tax base of the existing basin as well as the sales tax base. And then there is a need for parks on the west side of Washington. We don't have a lot of facilities over there. Most of the residents on that side have to go into Harrisville to recreate or come across Washington, which in particular is hard for children. They can't go on their own, but also understanding that, the safety of children is one of the overriding themes of this discussion in general. Pineview has an irrigation need. They need to install some more irrigation ponds, storage ponds, meaning there will be Pineview irrigation ponds in the city somewhere. This project just kind of worked as a good tie-in because they can duplicate each other, or again, essentially use the same ground and a lot of the same facilities. The best example of the same facilities is when Pineview fills up their irrigation storages, they send the water through a pipe to the storage, and then it holds it in their storage and they pump it out. When we send water to our detention ponds, we send it through pipe and hold it in the detention basins and then eventually let it out. We can actually use the same pipe, right, to get it from the canal all the way down to to our basin, partly because a lot of the canal have some overflow spots that connect to our storm system to take some of the pressure off. And so Pineview's able to, you can call it wheeling the water. They wheel it down to where they need to extract it from, and then they'll pull it out, put it in their irrigation storage, and then pump it out of this basin. And then obviously the thing the city needs to replace with this property is stormwater detention. There might be some other goals or some other things that come from this project, but those are the main ones I could think of. And the people I sent this presentation to review didn't tell me none of them, or tell me any of them were incorrect, although one of them did point out I had left off stormwater detention. So, as we all know, I'm not perfect. I forget probably the most important thing from the city perspective. This right now is the current proposal. This is the one that was brought by Jones and Associates last time they met with you on May 28th. It shows a full water facility. There's not wading areas or swimming areas. It's essentially proposed as a fishing facility with a track around it. There's obviously some tweaks that can be made to the design. In discussing the proposal, there's been everything, and in no particular order, but everything from swimming all the way up to, in theory, you could just have a piece of water with a track around it and tell people not to touch it. I mean, there's that option as well to the council. And so I think that this is what's being proposed, and the reason that this is the proposal is this accomplishes the goals of the storage capacity for detention basin water, as well as the storage capacity for irrigation water, and then it brings in the recreation component by adding the track around it and fishing / kayaking or whatever the council would prefer to add to that if they did want to go with this proposal. This is the design of the current recommended option the council approved back in March or April. It shows the two separate facilities. There would be a fence between the two. Like I mentioned earlier, this facility doesn't allow for all the detention we would need. This facility does allow for all of the irrigation storage Pineview would need. But based on what was said in that May 28th meeting, this facility design puts at risk that NCRS grant, which then turns the project, as far as local tax dollars go, into a much more expensive project. Any questions? Am I going too slow, too fast? Okay. These next two slides are not in any way meant to be in order or all-inclusive. The idea is that there are some benefits and some costs to this facility. Some of those we've already talked about. One of the concerns raised by the landowner that we've been talking about is, oftentimes Pineview facilities, they don't landscape them. They don't maintain them because that's not their primary job. Their job is to get irrigation out so the rest of us can maintain and landscape our yards. And so this type of facility or shared facility allows for the city to maintain it and keep it more attractive than the typical irrigation basin. And that's not just, it's pretty standard across the industry that irrigation detention or irrigation storage areas are not maintained. They keep the weeds down, but they don't landscape them and put swings and stuff near them, obviously. But this facility also adds some alternative recreation. There's some cost savings for both Pineview and North Ogden City. The project is cheaper by doing it with the NCRS grant and in full compliance with it in the short term and the long term. But as has been mentioned, it's still tax dollars. It's still something that is being spent that was collected from the citizens of America. So it's not to be taken lightly. I'm confident there's other community benefits I haven't mentioned here, and I'm sure there's some that you can think of. Just like on the next page, the cost to the community. There's definitely more than three, but these were the three that struck me as I was preparing this. On Obviously, we have to spend money to move the old basin, and because of that, there's some risk for expending the money, and just inherently, anytime you build something new, you're spending money, and you're not always guaranteed the outcome you're hoping for. I think we're pretty confident that the new facility will function exactly as designed and there won't be any issues. But there is a chance, as has been mentioned, that maybe we can't get that other property sold. There again, in my limited experience, I don't think that's a risk, because we've been, just based on what I've seen, I've been approached by 3 people. One of them partially at my prodding, the other 2 were essentially all on their own. They heard about the property and came to me, or came to the mayor, or came to someone at the city and said, "Hey, I'm interested. Make sure I'm on the list when you list it. When you put it out on the free market, let me know." There's been some concerns raised, especially in the last meeting, about ongoing maintenance issues, particularly with birds, those type of things. We've talked about some of those solutions internally, but then obviously the biggest concern that we've seen is kind of the safety concern. Adding, or I guess enlarging the amount of water in that area and inviting the public to it, it's a safety concern. How big of a safety concern is obviously going to be up for argument, but that's something that the policymakers get to kind of weigh and look at. Let's see. The next slide talks about the costs. As was mentioned earlier, right now the price from the landowner is $200,000 an acre. That's the price that it's been since the negotiations started. We did have the property appraised last summer, and it did appraise for 1.15. So currently the asking price is $170,000 over what the offer, or what the landowner says they want for the property. My impression is that there's a portion of this property that is under contract to sell, and I think it's probably pretty close to what we're paying, because I believe the developer is holding firm on price with everyone they deal with. I haven't seen the contract or don't know for sure, but I don't think, I'm fairly confident that we're all paying the same amount of money for that ground. The next issue is the cost to the city. If we went with a grass-only park and we didn't involve Pineview or anybody, the estimate that we've been using for since we've started this discussion says that it'll cost the city about $3.9 million. That's in addition to the cost of the land. And it will give us 12 acre-feet of storage, which equates to about $328,000 per acre-foot of storage. If we do the joint facility with Pineview and get the NCRS grant, then we end up with 22 acre-feet of storage at a cost of about $80,000 per acre-foot. So it ends up being a cost savings as far as a per acre-foot storage, as well as an initial outlay of cash, because the federal grant is involved. I've also included in here there's a cost. If we take, part of the reason we're moving the old basin is to increase the property tax value of that basin and bring it out and over. But by putting it somewhere else, we're now decreasing the taxable value potential of that property. And so that's what this $41,000 a year reflects, is the idea that you've lost some property tax potential. Currently, that property is green belted and is not paying $41,000 a year to the city. I think we're getting about $8 or $9 a year on that property after everyone else takes their portion. But that's kind of the way that Greenbelt works. These next slides are my crude attempt to try and articulate why we lose our storage capacity when we build a basin. This picture is stolen from the EPA. They provide a lot of materials for states and local governments to use, and this is one of their diagrams. But it shows your typical basin, and you can see on the right-hand side, it starts high and it comes down low. The reason it does that is to keep water from sitting at any one point in the basin and stagnating. we have several basins in the city that don't slope as well as we would like them to, and we end up with water that sits in areas. As many of you know, we had to completely reseed and replant one of our basins, or a portion of Orton Park recently, last year. Not entirely because of the slope, but partly just because the water wouldn't drain off as effectively as we would have hoped after the storms. So this shows the actual detention capacity of this basin as a triangle. By adding that secondary irrigation pond on the bottom, probably should have put these in a different order, you end up with more of a rectangular shape for detention capacity. And that's just because of the natural properties of water. You know, as soon as they all reach most of you know water will level itself automatically. And as soon as it gets even a 1/16 of an inch over where the outfall was the whole basin will drain that 1/16 of an inch. It's not just the water that's closest to the outfall. And so basically, that second triangle that's labeled regained capacity shows that 10 acre feet that Matt was talking about in May that's lost, that we gain back if we add a water base to the bottom of the detention facility. Any questions about that?
Yeah, will you go back just a minute and tell me about the appraisal value? What did you say the appraisal value of the land was back when? Did you say 1.1 million?
1.15.
1.15.
And we can ask for an update and ask another appraisal to give us a value as well. I'm not involved in commercial markets. I do know that some pieces of ground for multifamily units have sold lately for more than $200,000 an acre in the city. But I don't know. The hard thing about it is Utah's a non-disclosure state, so sometimes appraisers can't get the people who bought the ground to share their information with them. And commercial and multifamily folks are notorious for holding that information pretty close to the chest because they don't want to give their competitors an advantage when they go to try and pencil in another project. So that's the appraisal we got, and it was last summer, Councilman Severing, when that was completed. Any other questions on value on that one?
Well, as long as we're there. So I'm just kind of curious. I've been kind of opposed to this project from the beginning, though I've done a lot of thinking about it and a lot of research on it. But when I consider what cost is going to come to the city when you think about, additional storm lines and, the difference between the MPC or the R4 and all that, what really will be the cost the city's going to have to pay for this? I mean, last I understood now that there was going to be some kind of a concession for us filling that basin. Yeah, so the way that the community development area, which the old basin is in, is set up, it takes the property tax increment I'm circling back to your answer. So it sounds like I'm way off track, and I know. But the old basin is in the community development area, where any increase in taxable value is given back to the community development area to spend on projects. But those projects have to be in the list of projects that were approved at the time the area was created. And one of those projects in that list is filling in this detention basin, and the other project in that list is moving the detention basin. So they're two different line items. The filling in the detention basin is line itemed at about $320,000, $320,000. And then the moving of the basin is line itemed by the CDA at about $1.6 million. So what that means is and I'll delve into this a little bit more later as I talk about where the city's at in 10 years. But the idea is that as the CDA creates or generates the money from that tax increment, it can pay the city back any money we've expended. So right now, to move the basin, we know the cost that we've shown is at $1.7 million, or almost 1.8. The city actually has enough
its stormwater fund and its capital projects fund to pay that $1.8 million just on cash reserves. And then we would get paid back by the CDA up to that 1.6 million. So essentially the stormwater fund would be spending $200,000 to add that additional 5 acre-feet of storage. So I know whenever we're talking CDA and the enterprise funds and the general funds, because it feels a little bit like money's being shuffled around. And in a lot of ways it is, but the way that we always do it is they're called an interfund loan. So there's an actual document that says the capital project department or the capital project fund is loaning money to the CDA fund in amount of $1.6 million. And then as the CDA fund gets the money in, they pay that loan back. And under the terms of state law, we are allowed to charge a minor interest rate on that. We don't typically do that because usually it's funds that we're actually seeing a benefit to all the projects because we're not bonding or borrowing money. And so we're actually we save quite a bit on interest when we do that type of thing. So did I circle back to your question?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So anyways, that, it's, I guess I'm off track on my mind. Any questions about detention capacity? And if you want to pause here and ask Matt questions about capacity, the whole reason that we've kind of assembled everyone in the room is, Pineview and Jones and Associates have this, this proposal. It's obviously the same proposal that staff supported, 6 months ago, but it's kind of come back because of the design requirements. So if there's no questions there, and obviously we can come back to any of them, we can jump onto these project revenues. This is all based on the information that Zion's put together for us. That was the purpose of the presentation they did. The question kind of being, does the city want to move the basin, and then how do we pay for it? This project revenues is tied to what are the increases that the council or the city's going to see in taxable value if that old basin turns into a commercial area, or they also proposed an office or multifamily. Just so everyone's clear, I don't think staff is recommending anything other than retail because that is the most expensive or the most revenue-rich project. As was mentioned, though, commercial is oftentimes volatile. One of our public comments tonight mentioned that the market is what it's going to be, and sometimes you win and sometimes you don't. Best example of that is the Kmart on 12th Street. It sat vacant for 20 years before being torn down, and they still haven't started. I think it's a hospital that's supposed to go there.
That one went away.
Oh, it went away. So, yeah. So, anyways, there's a risk. I think the type of stuff that they were proposing in their presentation was smaller retail. The strip mall commercial centers that we've typically in our city at least seen pretty consistent lease space. They stay full. They might be vacant for a little while, or they might be getting lower rents, but they've stayed fairly full. The one exception to that might be the major, or the larger stores down in the North Ogden Plaza down by Kurtz. But most of our smaller space strip mall has been fairly successful, and some of it have done quite well recently. But anyway, so the summary is basically the low end of the property tax increase for office space is about $25,000 a year to the city. The high end would be about $42,000 a year, and that's apartments, multifamily, where they're going multi-stories, and thus the value of the building is quite substantial. Sales tax increase, it's basically zero if you do office or multifamily. There's no sales tax, but it's up to right around $200,000. That was based on the numbers Zion's proposed as for the type of development we would see. But there again, that comes into question. If it was a financial institution or a doctor's office or dentist's office, they don't generate sales tax. So oftentimes those spaces are leased by service type businesses that don't pay sales taxes. Unless the city unless the state changed the sales tax calculation, we're not anticipating them taxing most of the services, or at least not planning on it, because you can't plan on what they haven't made a decision on at the state level yet. And then this last one, the sales tax population distribution, that is only if it was multifamily. So for every person that comes into the city, we get a certain amount of money that's given to us from the sales tax dollars that are spent all across the state. So for every tax dollar collected in North Ogden City, 50 cents goes to the state and the other 50 cents stays in the city, or as far as the sales tax goes. And then the city or the state takes that 50 cents from every city and every county in the whole Utah, lump it into one sum, and then pass it out to everyone based on population, based on the understanding that, a lot of us shop in Riverdale or Layton or Salt Lake, and so they're just trying to share the wealth back to some of those cities, in particular the bedroom communities that don't have any commercial, but their residents still spend the money where we're at. So a good example of that is Pleasant View doesn't have a large commercial base, but they have a lot of residents, and a lot of those residents spend money in our city. So it helps our 50 cents, and then the other 50 cents gets split up and sent back to Pleasant View. This is just the summary of all the numbers that were given to us by Zions. For the 6.5 acres, it's about $100,000 in tax dollars, mostly property from the apartments, $60,000 for office, and $240,000 for retail. This next page talks about the actual revenues for the project, and this one focuses on the costs coming from Pineview and the costs coming from the NCRS. And really the most important number is the one at the bottom that says the city, our cost is essentially that $1.8 million, or the 1.772 or whatever it works out to. That's the actual city cost. There are some components, for example, anything recreationally based is covered at 50% by the NCRS. So every $100 we spend, they spend $100. The flood or the detention control facilities are actually covered at 100% by the NCRS. And so a lot of that piping and the berm work and things would be covered by the NCRS. And then the irrigation component, which is the Weber Box Elder or Pineview component, is covered at 75% by the NCRS. So it ends up being that that's the reason that the total expense to the city and to Pineview ends up being about $2.5 million to $3 million. And then the NCRS picks up the rest. So they pick up the other $4.5 million as part of their project funding. Any questions about that?
John, on those project revenues, page 3 of total North Ogden cost revenue summary, the 528,158 piping to the detention basin, is that the piping that's already been laid?
Yes. Okay. And so in reality, the city's expense is about that 1.25 left over that we still need to expend, or that we still would be required to expend. The next page talks about the maintenance, specifically the difference between a grass facility, recreation facility, and a water recreation facility. The main difference here is in the hours between employee time. There's not a significant cost difference in chemicals and things like that. The difference is essentially 408 hours compared to 268 hours. It's actually not as significant of a difference as it sounds. because the parks are typically maintained about 12 to 18 weeks a year. Wait, no, I'm off on that number. 24 to 30 weeks a year. So that's why the hours don't add up as much. Basically, it's March to November is when we're actively out in the parks. We're not mowing that whole time, but we're doing things as soon as the snow clears and before the snow comes back. So that it's not a significant cost savings, and so it's just added here because it is a cost. I don't think the pond maintenance is really a reason to say, hey, we should do that over the other. I think it's just it's nice to know at least that it's not more money to run the fishing facility or something from the city's perspective. This is kind of that, as far as the facility goes, the commitments from the city. We would fully landscape the 6.5 acres. We would provide an irrigation location to the Double Lot Ranch. What that means is it's a wet well. So it's a pipe at the bottom of the pond that would run north into the Double Lot Ranch property, and then there'd be a manhole, and then the Double Lot Ranch folks could drop a pump down there and irrigate their property from that pump. That's the way they currently run their property. There's a pond over there right now that's not as big as the pond that's being proposed, but they drop a straw in that water and pump water out and irrigate the rest of their facility. And they use ditches and other ways to get the water out of the main canals to that property. So it'd be the same thing they're already doing. And then we would, in the commitment to the landowner, we're committing to fence the area between our facility and the leftover property. But with a vinyl dipped fence, which is a little bit more expensive fence, in the actual design of the facility, we would be fencing the entire facility so that the trail and the water are separated from the road and the parking area. And then
if you have conversations with one another, just step out for a second, then come back in.
The idea would be that the pond would be fenced, and there'd be gates with latches that are taller than a toddler can reach. I mean, just to help improve the safety of the facility. Here's kind of the city or the options for the city. We could not move the detention basin. There's obviously nothing saying that we have to move it. It's just that the idea is it was brought up as a reason to move it because of the potential income from sales tax, property tax that could be generated. We could go back to, or we could do the grass detention basin. It's not recommended by the engineer because of the loss of detention capacity at this facility. Or we could move forward with the current engineer's recommendation, which is a dual-use facility. And in the scope of that, the council could go everything from it's just going to be pretty water people can look at to we're going to let people swim in it. A good example is Causey Reservoir up at the east side of Huntsville, or way up, I guess, east of Huntsville, is managed by the county. And they actually say, so the law in Utah is if you're on a boat, you have to have a life jacket in the boat with you for every person who's on the boat. At Causey Reservoir, the rule is you have to have the life jacket on. And if you don't have the life jacket on, it's like a $175 ticket. And so there's a lot of people up there who don't follow the rule, and a lot of people who don't get ticketed. But if you do get caught, then they'll ticket you. And it's expensive. And the city could impose that same type of thing if the city was inclined to moving towards a water recreation, kayaking or things like that. Or we could do a swimming option or a fishing option that's, basically stay out of the water. Any other questions about this? There's quite a few details that tie into the development agreement, and there's a couple of ways the council could approach this. We could continue talking about the other components, which is the agreement with Pineview or the Double Lot Ranch. You could pause now and talk about it and then move forward. Basically, the council can make a decision whenever it wants to, and obviously Ben and from Pineview and Matt are here to answer questions, and Tiffany and Dave are here. And I might have talked too much. Maybe you'd like to hear from one of them or discuss among yourselves for a while. It's really what the council wants to do. So, Mayor, I mean, I think Carl has a question.
So John, you'd mentioned leave it, that's one of our options, is leave it where it is. If we did leave it where it is, we would have wasted that $500,000 basically to run the pipe, right?
Yeah.
If we leave it where it is, could we make that detention basin deeper and turn that into the Pineview one? Would that be an option?
Matt would be the one to answer that question.
Would that be an option, I guess? And you could walk up and explain it. I mean, I don't even know if we even talked about that last time. I don't remember.
I don't think so.
Well, I do remember years ago, back when Terrell Grimley was the manager for Pineview Water Systems, he approached the city about doing just that, deepening the existing basin. And it is a possibility you could do that.
Okay.
Were you talking for stormwater detention or for Pineview detention?
Pineview, I mean, and so basically,
Yeah,
for Pineview.
I assumed you meant to excavate out the basin and put permanent water in the bottom of that basin.
Yeah, that's
what I was responding to.
I don't remember we talked about that, so. But we'd still be out the $500,000 that we'd spent on the pipe. So, and just, Blake said he's been against this. I was one who, I'm all for the water one, I always have been. And I did vote to have the water one. So, but I'm a kayaker, fisher, I think it'd be awesome. Does anybody know how, today I was driving through Ogden, they have a kayak park. I didn't even know they had a kayak park out by Fort Benaventura or something like that.
Yeah.
Does anybody know how that's ran?
On the river.
It's down 21.
Is it on the river?
On 21.
Oh, 'cause I had no idea they even had
First
that there. And I was thinking, oh, that'd be fun, but, okay.
And
Is that run by the city, or do we know?
I don't know.
And Riverdale actually had one that was installed and run by the city, and a couple years later, when the major storms or the major floods came through, it ruined it and caused some dangerous situations, and so they pulled it out and actually pulled all swirling sinkholes or whatever. So,
Okay.
There were two, but now I think there's just one.
Mayor?
Yes.
If we did allow, say, paddleboarding, kayaking, I can visualize kayaking without people swimming. But how do you paddleboard without swimming? Unless you're really good at it.
Now, you don't kayak without swimming, at least I don't.
As someone who I have a couple paddle boards and it's a lot of fun, but when you're learning, you're in the water. I mean, I've hardly seen anyone who can jump up on and not fall off because it's a different motion.
So if we were to allow paddleboarding, then we would almost necessarily have to allow swimming. I mean, how would you distinguish between the incidental swimming when you fall off your board versus intentional swimming coming in off the shore?
Yeah.
You take a board, you swim out to the middle with a bunch of your friends, and you just keep falling off and swim, right?
Right. Right.
You know how teenage boys can be. Okay. And the next question I have is fish survival. Ryan, I think you've done some research on that, and from what I understand in talking to Ryan and others, that fish don't do so well in those situations, especially this time of year where the water's warming up. Perhaps because it's turning over more and the temperature stays down more, maybe that's different, but I don't know if someone can address that. Anybody have an idea?
Far West has a fish pond out there.
Right, but it's not
dying right now because it's
it's not a reservoir where the water is constantly being brought in and taken out, so I don't know if that changes it.
Yeah, I'm not a fisheries person, but just in talking with the state fisheries people, if it's a shallow pond, the temperature will rise. There are different types of fish that they would use in a pond that was shallow, such as warm water fish like bass and perch. Yeah, I heard somebody say perch. But if you make it deeper, then then they're willing to bring in trout and other cold water.
What's considered shallow versus deep for them? Do you
They
know?
recommend a minimum of 10 feet deep.
Okay. So a Pine View Reservoir would definitely be deeper than 10 feet.
Yes.
Is that true, Ben?
And the other thing, the pond that's currently there now, there are bass in it.
Oh, really?
That live and get fished out, and I think they get thrown back in. It's a catch and release, but it's by private invitation only, so don't everyone get your fishing poles. But, and I haven't been down there, so I'm just saying it's, that there are fish that survive in the pond that's currently on the property.
Wow. Next question I had is, John, I think you alluded to this. You reached out to our insurance carrier about the effect on our insurance with the risk that comes with having water recreation. And they said,
the underwriter responded and said there wouldn't be an increase except for the additional facility. So basically, by adding another park, we would say that pay the same rate per acre, but there's not a significant enough, from an insurance standpoint, increase in risk to that the rate would go up higher.
so grass versus water,
They
the
would.
rate would be the same.
That's what they're.
The
that's,
increase.
Yeah, that's in the letter they sent to us. Sorry, I should have provided it at the meeting. I'd forgotten about that.
Okay. Those are the questions I have at the moment.
Other questions from the council?
Yeah, I've got, so my biggest concern is with the retail, as was mentioned. I've gone through and thought about previous retail in North Ogden, starting with Ace. People were upset that we build an Ace. People are upset we put in standard plumbing. People are upset we put in a car wash. People are upset we put in O'Reilly's. We're upset we put in Starbucks. We're upset we're putting in Arby's. I think who would want to build a North Ogden right now? All our residents are upset anything we put in, so.
Well, I don't know that all the residents are, but.
Well, that's true, but.
The company's making the.
I've been getting more on Facebook, and that's what I've been noticing is anytime something new comes out, all we hear is how bad it is, and we're not getting what we want, and we should sign a petition to get somebody else here, and that's not how it works. So it's when we put in new retail, maybe we're not gonna like that either. So
Some will.
Well, I know. I really like Ace. It's nice and close. I'm excited for all of them to open, but that's my concern with retail is who would want to come and build in North Ogden with the perception right now that we have?
And yet they keep coming.
So most of what we're seeing come and approach the city right now are national companies. O'Reilly's, Starbucks, Arby's. Ace is kind of the outlier. Even the strip mall just north of Ace, you're seeing it go to GNC, AT&T, T-Mobile, which are national carriers. Obviously the Fizz does quite well. I keep telling the owners that they should just give me stock because of how often I'm there, but they don't agree with me on that. But one of the things that kind of ties into that is, if we look at, obviously we try to do an analysis that looked out 10 years to see where the income comes, how the city fares. If we do the grant-based project, in almost every single situation, office is the exception. If we did an office project and did the NCRS grant, we would still owe ourselves back about $62,000. That's assuming that obviously things wouldn't get built right away. So we're not getting 10 years of property tax, we're getting less. But in both the multifamily and the retail, we're in the positive, meaning we've paid ourselves back every dime that we've invested. And in retail, based on the Zion's numbers, we'd come out in 10 years with about 1.6 million extra over the total. So it's not a yearly income, it's the total accumulated. Obviously there's a lot of risk involved in that, or you know what I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty. If we did it where we had just put the facility in at our own cost in 10 years, and we had changed it to retail, we still would owe ourselves about $350,000. And then the office and the apartments don't pencil out as well. The office is about $2 million in the hole still, and the apartments is about $1.5 million in the hole. Understanding that it's money, the way this analysis was done was to show paying ourselves back to be where we are at today. So we wouldn't be owing anybody money except for ourselves. It would just be where we'd be financially. I know from Pineview's perspective, and I think Ben could speak to this, from their standpoint, this project is a win for them because they will get a facility for much cheaper than if they had to go out and build it on their own. Plus, it actually it benefits them in some ways having the landscaping and stuff. But there are some harms if we do fishing. Then they might have to clean their pumps out more. They'll have to install different screens and things to keep their system clean. But I mean, I think it'd be good for the council to just hear from the Weber Box Elder groups, Pineview, and see, what have they found in the last couple of weeks as they've been researching this. Obviously, the staff here has been trying to answer the questions that the council raised in back in May, and just make sure that we can give you all the information you're after so you can make the decision that you feel is best.
Mayor? When they do come up and answer some of these or questions, one of them would be to answer Mr. Casey's on what he rose, the weighting and the zone changes, the concerns he had.
Our turnover.
The turnover. Could you answer those also, address them? Okay.
Mayor, council members, thank you. My name is Benjamin Quick. I'm the general manager of Weber Box Elder Conservation District, one of 3 entities that make up Pineview Water Systems. I'm accompanied by one of my many bosses. This is the chairman of the Weber Box Elder Conservation District. I wanted to make sure that I was held accountable for everything I say while I'm here. As far as the turnover rate, that is very hard to answer. I could give you different scenarios if I had worked them up before, but it's a function of the amount of detention you have. That's a fixed. We'll have about 19 acre feet of irrigation storage, but we don't ever maintain our reservoirs at maximum elevation. And one of the benefits to that is it allows us a bit more flexibility to transfer more water when we have too much. Also, one of the benefits of this project is that, especially with foreseeable wet weather, you've turned a 22 acre foot reservoir into potentially almost a 40 acre foot reservoir, because if we know a storm is coming, we keep pumping out of our reservoir. We don't put any water in, and then that elevation lowers. If there's fish, there's other considerations. We'll have to keep a minimum level, but that just adds to the amount of detention that your city will be available to utilize. So I came unprepared today to talk about, if a gallon of water comes in, how long does it take for that gallon of water to be discharged or released from the pond. So I apologize, I really can't answer that one. Some other considerations, I'll circle back a little bit. John, you were wondering how I came into the fray. I actually approached Mayor Taylor and asked him if, can we dig out the bottom of your detention basin? And he said, you know what, we're looking at selling that and using that for tax revenue purposes, but we're looking to build a new detention basin, and let's work together. And so here we are. One of the many benefits of one thing was mentioned. There's been about over $500,000 of storm drain that has been installed. Well, the conservation district we're not a freeloader. We want to be a partner. So I had my engineer go and prepare a cost estimate of how much it would cost for us to install our own pipe without utilizing the storm drain that's already installed. That came up to a figure. I sent that figure to Jones and Associates to to confirm it or spot weaknesses in it, and it came back a little bit higher, but pretty close to what it was. And I am not in a position to say that I will give you money, but I am in a position to say that I'm going to ask the board of directors to help contribute towards that storm drain, because we're going to be using it and we don't have to install our own water transmission main. And that figure is going to range from about approximately 120,000 to 132,000. Let's see, I want to answer all questions while I'm up here. I was asked a question earlier today by Councilman Swanson. What are the time limits associated with the NRCS grant? As I told you last time, we were looking for an extension for the planning phase. That was granted. We have until July 31st of 2020. So that is safe. As far as the design phase, we're allowed up to a year. I talked to JUB, our consulting engineers that are working on the Plan EA, was able to get a firm commitment that it would take no longer than 6 months. The construction phase, we would get anywhere from, well, we could get up to 2 years, where I can't really foresee this project taking more than one season. There's been a little bit of concern about putting the cart before the horse, relying on money that we don't have in our pockets yet. I would like to clarify the way that the NRCS grant works. And before this meeting, I called the NRCS and I had a conversation with them just to reinforce my understanding of the grant. The whole project has been approved. As long as we fulfill design requirements and all of the requirements stipulated by the NRCS. So if we stick to basically what we proposed in the beginning, which I think we're right there, then that money has already been set aside for the design. If the design is prepared in a way that it meets all of NRCS's construction standards, then the construction funds are there. So, you know, it's not a whole lot of finger crossing. It's just following through with what we said we were going to do. As long as we do that, that money's not in jeopardy. It's there waiting for us. At this point, are there any questions or concerns?
Well, Ben, yeah, I've got a question. First, thanks for being here tonight.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you spending time with us. If we choose not to accept and move forward with this tonight, the NRCS grant is not gone forever. If we decided to do this in 2 years, 3 years down the road, we would still have access. We can still apply for this grant, right?
Correct. Just with no guarantee of getting it awarded. So.
Yes.
The NRCS grant, though, as I understood it, was dependent on the multi-pronged approach.
Exactly.
The Pine View with the detention and a recreation component, correct?
Correct.
So we would still need to have those three components in order to be considered for an NRCS grant.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
And again, that would be okay whether we made a decision before July 31st, 2020 or July 31st, 2026. As long as those the components are together, you don't see why there'd be any reason why we still couldn't qualify for an NCRS grant.
Well, we kind of stepped in at an opportune time. We I called Greg Siegmiller from JUB, and I called Matt Harvingston from Jones and Associates, and we put our heads together and we wrote that grant in 2 days to get it turned in on time. I think that's a major reason why one of the reasons why we got this grant is because the time constraints were so tight that there weren't nearly as many applicants. Not to say that our proposal wasn't good, it's just that it was picked out of a hat that had far fewer names in it. So the probability of getting the same grant, I would assume, would be less.
But possible.
Yes, sir.
So real quick, just a clarification, when Phil asked about the recreation component, that's a water recreation component. It can't be just a detention and grass, right? It has to be a water recreation, like was proposed originally, correct? And for the NRCS, correct?
Well, or fishing, as John pointed out.
I consider that's water. So,
yeah.
I mean, yeah, yes.
So, yeah, if we don't...
Can't have a big grass field.
That doesn't guarantee a dismissal of the project. It just it takes out one of the components and makes it that's taken away one of the things that we said we were going to do, and they would then have the ability to withdraw the monies because we deviated from the original proposal.
Okay.
Is it walking track recreation?
I was wondering that myself, and you know what? These are my thoughts, and so take it with a grain of salt. You're using one piece of land, and you're recreating on it. You're running, you're walking. That's a recreation. You've got storm water detention, and you've got an irrigation basin. I feel that personally, I think that could work, but there's no verification behind that.
So what you said a moment ago, the NRCS possibly withdrawing the money isn't necessarily because it's a water recreation versus a dry land recreation, versus like a track or something. It would be because we would be deviating from what we originally submitted. Is that correct?
No, I may have the inclusion of the track is a recreation. You're not actually in the water.
Right.
So I don't know for sure if that will qualify. John has had a conversation where fishing does make the project qualify. If we take fishing and kayaking and swimming out of it, does that renege the offer? I don't know.
Okay.
And that was with the state recreation grant folks. The idea being that it was tied to the water, because that's the reason our project got picked for that $100,000 from the state. But I think what Ben's saying is that, you know, if we propose the project, I think like Councilman Barker was suggesting, the idea being that the trail is the recreation, but it would be a pond in the middle. The nice thing about the NCRS is, my understanding is they do a back and forth during this next year as they review the environmental analysis and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we have about 9 months of plan reviews and public hearings and things that happens before July 30th of next year. Is that
correct?